You know what's absolutely mind-blowing about modern warfare? Sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't a missile or a bomb. It's a simple switch. Picture this scene with me. It's a cold morning somewhere in northern Ukraine. 120,000 Russian troops are spread across the front lines, part of what's supposed to be the world's second-largest army. They wake up, reach for their communication devices, and see two words that change everything: no connection. Now you might think, okay, so what? No internet? Big deal, right? But for these soldiers, this wasn't about losing social media. This was about losing everything that makes a 21st century army actually function. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of how Russia's military machine went from a coordinated force to a chaotic mess that started firing on itself. All because someone, somewhere, decided to flip a switch and cut off their Starlink satellites. This is the story of the biggest technological military collapse in modern history. And trust me, it's wilder than any movie. Let me introduce you to someone. We'll call him Ivan, and he might be the most honest Russian soldier in this entire war. Ivan is sitting in a muddy trench, and he's not worried about the Ukrainian drones buzzing overhead or the artillery in the distance. His biggest fear is staring right back at him from his phone screen. No signal. In a video that somehow made it out, Ivan looks directly into the camera and says something that should terrify the Kremlin. Without Starlink, we won't last until March. This place will become an inescapable trap for us. Think about what he's really saying here. Russia, this massive nuclear superpower with one of the world's largest defense budgets, has become completely dependent on Elon Musk's civilian internet satellites just to survive on the battlefield. How did we get here? Well, when Russia first invaded, they had their own military communication system called ERA. It was supposed to be this sophisticated, secure network, but Ukraine systematically destroyed it within the first few months. They turned that entire system into what military analysts now call a pile of scrap metal. So Russia improvised. They started smuggling Starlink terminals through third countries, the same white, mushroom-shaped dishes you might see on someone's roof for home internet. For a while, this actually worked pretty well. Russian commanders could coordinate attacks, artillery could receive targeting data, drone operators could stream video back to headquarters. But then everything changed. Ukraine, working with Starlink officials and probably some pressure from the Pentagon, identified these illegally obtained terminals one by one. They tracked them by coordinates, usage patterns, digital signatures. And then they pulled the plug. There's this powerful video of a Russian soldier literally kicking and trying to break one of these white Starlink antennas. At first, it looks like just an angry outburst. But when you understand what that dish represented to him, the scene becomes tragic. That antenna wasn't just providing internet. It was his connection to artillery support, to medical evacuation helicopters, to early warning systems telling him when bombs were about to drop. When that signal died, he wasn't just disconnected from the internet. He was expelled from the modern world entirely. Military historians are comparing this to World War I. We're in 2026, and Russian soldiers have been technologically transported back to 1915, back to the era where messages were carried by runners through mud, where artillery fired blind, where commanders had no idea what was happening a few hundred meters away. Now here's where this story gets really dark. When an army goes blind, they don't just become less effective, they become dangerous to themselves. Let me tell you about what happened in the Zaporizhzhia sector, because this perfectly shows you the nightmare that unfolds when communication collapses. It's midnight. A 12-person elite Russian assault group is moving through the darkness. Their Starlink connection died hours ago. Their radios are giving them nothing but static. They have no digital maps, no coordinates from headquarters, just mud, fear, and absolute silence. In the confusion, this group accidentally starts moving toward their own Russian positions instead of toward Ukrainian lines. Now picture the Russian artillery unit behind them. They can't access drone imagery. They can't radio for confirmation. All they see are unidentified forces approaching in a war zone. So they do what soldiers do, they open fire. An entire 12-person assault group was wiped out by their own artillery because nobody could communicate the simple message: "Those are our guys." This isn't just a tragic mistake. This is what happens when a modern army's nervous system is severed. According to reports, Russian soldiers now fear the units next to them more than they fear Ukrainian forces. Think about that. You're more afraid of your own comrades than the actual enemy. So how does a superpower fix this problem? Do they launch new military satellites? Deploy secret encrypted networks? No, they beg. This is almost too crazy to believe. But right now, Russian officers are on Telegram posting in chat groups, begging civilians to send money. Not for food or medical supplies, for cheap, Chinese-made amateur radios. The year is 2026, and the Russian army is crowdfunding for walkie-talkies you'd use on a camping trip. Here's the fatal flaw. Those radios are unencrypted. They broadcast on open frequencies. So every time a Russian commander picks up that radio and asks, "Where are we going?" or "We need ammunition," the Ukrainian army is listening. It's like playing poker while shouting your cards to everyone at the table. Ukrainian artillery doesn't even need to guess anymore. They just listen to the radio, triangulate the signal, and fire. According to intelligence reports, the moment those Starlink terminals went silent, Russian offensive operations just stopped. Complete halt. A Russian tank without signal support is nothing more than a metal coffin on tracks. And the soldiers inside know it. This brings us to what happened on the Northern Front, what was supposed to be Russia's big breakthrough. Instead, it became a mass grave. Ukrainian forces conducted a clearing operation and found 18 Russian soldiers hiding in a cellar. These weren't hardened warriors ready to fight to the death. These were men who had been cut off from communication for weeks. When captured, they revealed something shocking. Their commanders, unable to contact them via satellite, had told them the village was surrounded by NATO special forces and German troops. It was a lie born of desperation. Where communication ends, propaganda begins. But propaganda doesn't stop bullets. And here's the statistic that tells you everything you need to know about how this war is really going. Ukrainian Commander Alexander Syrskyi stated that Ukrainian units are winning 90% of direct combat engagements. 90%. 9 out of 10 battles. Why? It's not magic, it's technology. Ukraine has satellites, real-time intelligence, coordinated drone networks. Russia has silence and soldiers begging for radio donations. So why did this happen now? According to Reuters and other sources, Russia's systematic purchase of Starlink terminals through illegal channels was the final straw. Ukraine's persistent demands, combined with Pentagon pressure, finally pushed the button. Geofencing was implemented. Terminals in Russian-occupied zones were identified and shut down. It was a technological execution. What we're witnessing here is a preview of how all future conflicts will be fought. Wars won't be decided by who has the most soldiers or biggest bombs. They'll be decided by who controls the information space, who has real-time intelligence, who can see the battlefield while keeping the enemy blind. The Russian defense industry has been exposed. After decades of boasting about their technology, they were defeated by a software update and a terms of service violation. This is the new reality. You don't need nuclear weapons to destroy an army anymore. You just need to flip a switch. Right now, thousands of Ivans are sitting in trenches, clutching cheap radios, waiting for signals that aren't coming. They're fighting a 21st century war with 20th century tools, while facing an enemy that can see everything. That's the story of how 120,000 troops went dark and started turning on each other. It's not just a military defeat, it's a technological reckoning. What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments. This has been Media Talks, and we'll keep tracking these signals or the lack of them. Now here's something that most people don't realize about this communication blackout. It's not just the soldiers on the front line who are affected. When you cut an army's nervous system, the entire body starts shutting down. Think about it this way. You're a logistics officer sitting in some bunker 50 kilometers behind the lines. Your job is to keep thousands of soldiers fed, armed, and supplied with fuel. In a modern army, you track everything digitally. Which unit needs ammunition, where they are exactly, what's the safest route to reach them. But when those Starlink terminals went dark, all of that disappeared overnight. Russian supply convoys are now driving essentially blind. They don't know if the positions they're heading to are still controlled by Russian forces or if they've been overrun hours ago. They can't get updates about Ukrainian drone activity along their routes or where the latest artillery strikes are happening. The result is catastrophic. Military analysts report that Russian logistics losses have tripled since the communication shutdown. Fuel convoys getting ambushed because they drove straight into Ukrainian positions. Medical teams spending 6 hours trying to find wounded soldiers because they can't establish radio contact, and their GPS coordinates are from last week. There's this particularly heartbreaking report from the Kharkiv region. A medical evacuation team finally reached a wounded unit after hours of searching in the dark. By the time they got there, it was too late, not because of enemy fire, but because nobody could tell them where to go. This is what military experts call a cascade failure. One system breaks, and suddenly everything connected to it starts collapsing like dominoes. If you want to see the absolute worst-case scenario of what happens when an army goes blind, we need to talk about the Dorilia Line disaster. Russian commanders had positioned a significant defensive force along this strategic line. Under normal circumstances, these units would check in regularly. Position secure, we need supplies. Enemy movement spotted. A constant stream of information flowing back to headquarters. But when the Starlink signal died, that information stream just stopped. Here's the terrifying part. The commanders back at HQ assumed no news was good news. They kept moving units around on their maps, thinking they had a solid defensive line, when in reality they were managing a ghost army. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Azov forces were conducting a systematic clearing operation. Because the Russian units couldn't communicate with each other, they couldn't warn the bunker next door that they were being overrun. One position fell, then the next, like lights going out in a building. The Russian reinforcements never came. Why? Because nobody could call for them. You can't request backup when your communication device is a paperweight. When Russian generals finally realized what had happened, days later, they discovered they had been commanding phantom units on a map while their actual soldiers were either captured, killed, or hiding in cellars, completely cut off from the war. Now let's talk about why Russia's famous artillery, what they call the god of war, has essentially become expensive scrap metal. In modern warfare, artillery crews live by one golden rule: shoot and scoot. You fire your weapon, and then you move immediately. Why? Because within seconds, enemy counter-battery radar tracks your shell back to its source and fires back at your exact position. To execute this effectively, you need precise, real-time navigation data. You need to know exactly where you are and exactly where you're moving next, instantly. Without Starlink, Russian artillery crews have lost the scoot part of the equation. They're trying to navigate escape routes using paper maps from the 1940s. You can't just guess your way through a minefield in a 40-ton howitzer. So here's what happens now. They fire, they hesitate while fumbling with outdated maps, they try to figure out which direction is safe, and then Ukrainian counterfire, guided by satellite data, hits them with mathematical precision. It's not even a fair fight anymore. Ukrainian systems can calculate firing solutions in seconds, while Russian crews are still trying to fold their paper maps correctly. The god of war has been struck blind, and blind artillery is just a target waiting to be destroyed. But there's something happening here that doesn't show up on battlefield maps, and it might be even more devastating than the tactical failures, the complete psychological breakdown of Russian forces. Ukrainian intelligence has been intercepting phone calls from Russian soldiers to their families, and what they're hearing is the sound of an army losing its mind. One call that really stuck with me went like this. A soldier tells his wife, "We don't even know if the orders we receive are real anymore." Sometimes we get contradictory commands from different units because nobody can verify anything. We're just guessing and hoping we don't get killed by our own side. Think about what that means. These aren't just complaints about bad food or tough conditions. These are men who have fundamentally lost faith in their entire command structure. Military psychologists call this institutional trust collapse. When soldiers stop believing their leadership can keep them safe or even knows what's happening, combat effectiveness doesn't just decline, it crashes through the floor. We're seeing the evidence everywhere. Desertion rates have reportedly skyrocketed. Entire units are refusing orders to advance because they know that without communication support, they're being sent on suicide missions. Some groups have essentially gone into defensive positions and refuse to move, regardless of what headquarters demands. The Russian army isn't just losing battles, it's losing the will to fight. So what does this mean for the future? Because make no mistake, every military in the world is watching this disaster and taking notes. What we're witnessing isn't just a Russian failure. It's the birth of an entirely new type of warfare. Some analysts are calling it digital siege warfare. Instead of surrounding a city and cutting off food and water, you surround an army and cut off their data. The Pentagon has already updated its doctrine based on what's happening in Ukraine. The lesson is crystal clear. Your communication infrastructure isn't just important. It's more critical than tanks, more vital than air superiority, maybe even more essential than ammunition. China is reportedly accelerating development of independent satellite networks, specifically because they watched a superpower get neutralized by losing access to civilian satellite technology. But here's the truly terrifying part. This same technology that's blinding the Russian army could theoretically shut down civilian infrastructure, financial systems, or communication networks anywhere in the world. We're entering an era where a software engineer has more power to influence a war than a general with 1 million troops. Right now, thousands of Ivans are sitting in trenches, staring at dead screens, clutching cheap radios, waiting for orders that will never come. They're fighting a 21st century war with 20th century tools while facing an enemy that can see everything. The Russian military spent decades building an army for the wrong war. They prepared for 1945 and walked into 2026. The gap between those two realities is measured in thousands of lives lost, not to enemy fire, but to confusion, friendly fire, and systemic collapse. This is the story of how 120,000 troops went dark and started destroying themselves. It's not just a military defeat, it's a technological reckoning that will reshape how wars are fought forever. The signals are clear, the lessons are written in blood, and the future of warfare has arrived. Russia just learned it the hardest way possible. Thanks for staying with Media Talks through this extended deep dive. Hit that subscribe button if you want to understand how the modern world really works. Because when the screens go dark, the story is just beginning.